let's rise for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order and announce that we have an executive session today at 4:30 regarding litigation. Next will be the approval of the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from November 4, 2019 as submitted.
I will second. Second.
Any questions, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
And next we have the police report. Mike?
Good evening. In the month of October, the police department had 185 calls for service, investigated 11 crimes, had 2 arrests, officers conducted 68 traffic stops, and investigated 7 accidents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Next on the agenda is the bills list.
I make a motion to approve the bills list dated November 18, 2019 in the amount of $1,017,293.03.
Second.
Any comments, questions on the bills list?
You normally indicate which bills list, not just the total.
You need to break down on the reimbursable versus capital versus open space?
Yeah, I'm finding time for Art, he's got his highlighted
Okay.
around.
Well, the township's bills list was $175,004.65. Reimbursable bills was $32,631.08. Capital road bills, $289,446.68. Open space bills, $450,195.76.
Liquid fuels.
Is there something? Oh, yeah. Liquid fuels was $70,014.86 for a total of $1,017,293.03. No questions? You seconded it, yeah. Any questions? Sarah?
This Nationwide Trust Company that's on the reimbursable list, where is it reimbursed from?
The state pension aid that we have. And this year, it covered all of our non-uniform obligation or pension.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have land development. We have 670 Bertrand Road land development, acknowledge of receipt. We're just acknowledging the receipt of that.
Correct.
Okay. Next, we have 352 Black Forest Road subdivision, request for waiver of historical impact study.
I make a motion to grant the waiver request for 352 Black Horse Road subdivision.
Second.
Any comments or questions? Jim, go ahead. Jim was first, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Jim Helm, and I'm the chairperson of the Historical Commission. We did make a recommendation to the board. Our recommendation was to have the applicant complete the impact study, but only 4 components, not a full impact study. The 4 components are to document existing conditions. That would involve measurements and photos, documentation. Overview of the historic development over time, give an understanding of this current development relative to other developments that have occurred for the record. And then it creates a statement of historical significance and then a list of things, a recommendation to mitigate the steps. This would be I think commensurate to the level of development that's being provided.
Okay.
And do you have a thought on what that's going to cost the developer?
We do. We have 3 people on the Historical Commission that have experience doing this type of work, not that we're recommending those companies, but we have informed people. They expect this to be somewhere between 20 and 25 hours worth of labor. You can get this done by qualified licensed professionals for around $100 an hour, so that's about $2,000 to $2,500 for this scale. A full impact study could be as many as 3-4 times that much, because you would normally want to understand the deed record, the historical record of the property as part of the project. That takes a lot of time. So we're not recommending that, albeit that's unknown to the Historical Commission at this time, the full history of this project.
Are you aware that the Planning Commission voted against the impact study?
Yeah.
And how do you resolve the difference
Okay.
between the two?
Yeah, keep in mind, they came to the Historical Commission first, not the Planning Commission. It came to the Historical Commission without a recommendation for a waiver. So we saw it as a subdivision that met the requirements. So we said they didn't ask for a waiver, so conduct it. 3 days later, it did go to the Planning Commission. I was not there. Wasn't able to opine. They didn't know our position on impact studies. So I really can't comment to this. Seeing that this was on this agenda surprised us, because we're surprised that it didn't come to the Historical Commission asking for a waiver. It did not. We did discuss it at our last meeting, which was held on the 11th, and the recommendation I made to you was a unanimous recommendation.
What do you expect out of this? I mean, what's it for? What's the purpose?
The purpose of an impact study is so that the township and the applicant can fully understand the history of the project before you disrupt the history of the project. So you go into it with the eyes wide open. And so part of it's documentation, and then of course there's expected to be recommendations for the applicant on how to mitigate potential impact.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've looked at the plan that he submitted. He's nowhere near the actual historic building.
We just looked
And
at it
the
as
impact,
a...
I mean, the only impact I could see is maybe some photographs, but you're probably not even gonna see the two dwellings that he's gonna put in from the road from where the historic building is.
Jim, is the criteria 500 feet?
Yeah,
It is
I mean,
500 feet. These are 248, you know, and then to the driveway, 186 versus something else.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
a
Mike,
pretty
you
good
say-
distance.
we
And
have an
there's trees.
ordinance, let me just be clear.
No, I understand.
We have an ordinance,
Right.
so check the box, within 500 feet. We're not asked to grant waivers and as you know, that's for you guys.
Well, I know.
This was, is it within, it is. Now, the purpose of this is to fully document and to be contemplative of how to protect the historic resource. That's the purpose overall for the entire ordinance.
On the protection, yeah, and I just don't see anything in here where this study is gonna help do anything.
Appreciate that, Mike,
To,
but you
to
or
protect
I
it.
are not licensed professionals
Well,
in historic
Granted,
preservation,
but,
so.
I mean, the big impact on this historic building is being 7 feet from a road, whereas everything else that this person's doing is much further, you know, hundreds of
I'm
feet
sure that
from
would come out in the impact study.
But there's nothing you can't
You're
do.
judging the study before it's done.
Well, I understand that, but you can't move the road, so that impact is there, nothing's gonna change, no greater impact that I can see, and again, I would bet that no one can see greater than the impact of that road frontage.
Yeah, I just leave you with a thought. You're focusing on one aspect, not the four.
Not the documentation, I
So
understand.
you're focusing on the impact and mitigation to the impact. And I really couldn't tell you what the professional is going to say is the mitigation steps. That's not my
Right.
profession. So I can comment that there's 4 things we're asking for. We are not recommending a complete soup to nuts impact study where you would understand all the history of the product, of the property. That takes quite a bit of time. We're not asking for that because of the scale of what's in front of you.
Well, I understand, but most of it sounds like documentation of a historic property, is what you're asking for.
Well, you're assuming there's no impact, and
Well,
I don't know that.
Well, I don't know it for sure either, but even if, if there is an impact, then what? He
It
can't
would
do
be
it?
steps towards mitigation. The applicant could agree to the steps that were come to the board, historical commission for waiver, recommendation to the board.
Or you could recommend conditions on their approval.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm a strong property rights person, so I would have a hard time not allowing him to move forward this.
I recommend then that you talk to the historical commission about changing the ordinance.
Yeah, it's on my
Because
mind.
the
believe me.
ordinance is there, and that's our role.
Yes, I know.
And so if you're
And
saying.
you're doing your job.
The only criteria here that the applicant has put forward is the fact that they're gonna do a 2-acre lot. Well, I have news for you, every subdivision in the township involves a 2-acre lot. So the explanation for the waiver of being a 2-acre lot would apply to any subdivision we look at.
Right.
So we did not hear a criteria that the applicant provided that would be unique to this property. And we're not in a position right now to judge whether or not
Right.
there's an impact with the plan that's laid out.
Correct.
And they didn't come to the Historic Commission for the waiver.
Did not come to the historical commission for a waiver.
Well, I think in that respect, I think we just need to make sure that we have, I agree, that was a misstep, but I think the order doesn't matter, whether they come to
No.
historic first or planning first. In this case, planning looked at it, and the thought was that the money, looking at the layout of this plan, that the money would have been potentially better spent on screening if that was to be spent. Now, we were talking about a bigger number, but
Are we
that was the thought of planning.
Are we worried about the developers' money?
Yes, always.
What we're worried about.
Oh, it's other people's
You
money.
did-
I mean, if you guys want to
Spending money
pay for the, if you
unnecessarily.
want to pay for the
Pardon me a
impact
second.
study, I'd be all
If she
right.
is going to speak,
Yes, I'm
she's
sorry.
speaking to the
Sorry,
microphone so
Brian.
the rest of us can hear it.
So, my other thought on this, because I went to all the meetings, is I don't think there's nothing here that's proposed that's gonna be not able to be done after the subdivision, if it were to be granted, goes through.
You would just be impacting the property before you knew what you
Well,
were impacting.
I
So I
think
just point
what's-
the order out.
Well, okay.
The purpose
So,
of the
okay, so
impact
I'm-
study is to make sure
But
that
I'm
the
saying
board.
documenting how the farm changed through history, a current subdivision has no bearing on that at all. And part of the recommendation here is to have somebody go research how the farm changed in history. So what we're doing is making this person bear the burden of past changes to the property as part of the cost of the study, which I think, I'm not against having an impact study in general, but in this case, I don't see, the visibility of the structures isn't gonna change, as far as I can tell. The major impact of additional traffic is minimal. All those things, if they were proposing a building that hid one of the current buildings or in addition to it that changed it, then you're talking about something that's sort of non-reversible. And I could see a good case for a study there, but in this case, the buildings aren't gonna be touched. The new structures are gonna be screened by existing vegetation with no changes whatsoever. And as far as potential mitigation, I'm wondering what kind of mitigation could be suggested other than potentially landscaping.
I appreciate that you guys are trying to write the report before it's done by a professional.
Well,
So I can't comment to any of it because you're speculating and this is not my job. I don't do this as a licensed professional. And the ordinance says you do an impact study unless there's good reason not to. The fact that the board wants to look at the plan and say, I don't see any problem here, could allow some very selective allocation of, oh, you have to, but you don't have to.
Oh,
And
that is a problem.
I just put that out there, like, where do we draw the line on
And that's
us
the problem with our
prejudging the
ordinance.
impact here?
That's right, that's the problem.
Please look at the ordinance, if you want us to change the ordinance,
Well, the
we'll do
ordinance
so.
does-
I will always
okay.
also
It gives
point
it,
out,
it brings it
It
back to
gives
the
the
board,
board
which is not
waiver,
good.
But the ordinance also puts a 500-foot number
That's
on
why it has to
an
be
impact
rewritten.
study.
That's why it has to be
So-
rewritten to a 50-foot, and then you wouldn't have that
Well,
problem.
no, I'm saying it gives a 500-foot to consider an impact study. It doesn't mean that at 501 feet, all potential impacts are gone, and at 499, all potential impacts
Have to
are
be
at
done.
100% and have to be studied. It gives you a range where they should be considered for more discussion, which is what we're having now.
yeah,
And that's,
Right.
whenever you have a number like that, there's always a gray area. You have to pick a number, right, to have.
we have no context for how the number got in the ordinance, it was years and years ago.
No,
it
but
was
I
in there.
mean, there has to be a number. It couldn't be 10 miles, that would be
No, I agree.
ridiculous. So there's somewhere between ridiculous and reasonable.
I just want to leave you one last thought, and I'll sit down because other people want to talk. And that is that the fact that West Vincent has a historic impact study in the ordinance, we are far from unique. Almost all townships in the county have an impact study requirement. So if you're thinking, well, we're this property rights township, that's fine. But you're not unique in requiring an impact study.
Well, I never said we were.
Adjustments. Okay, I just wanted to point that out because, well, that's what I'm here for. Thank you.
Harry
Don't
next,
go,
and then
Jim.
Carl after that. So,
Sarah,
there's two people.
Harry is
Oh, two
before you.
people. I just wanted
You
to
went,
know.
your microphone.
Microphone.
I just wanted to know what the historic issues or problems were, and I haven't heard that. So, and I think you're not the people who would tell, when they were talking about having, some people were saying we ought to have an impact statement, and I just wanted to know what was there to be protected. So, that's my question.
Okay. Carl's next. Carl, you want to use the microphone?
If I get on the microphone, it's gonna hurt.
Well, it's
Everyone can
precedent.
hear me.
It's precedent, so
Yeah,
please.
make everybody do it.
It's not a
You can hear
question,
me.
it's not a question.
That
It's not a
doesn't
question.
matter, because then other people will say, well, you could hear me too. They started this years ago. Everybody uses.
No,
the
this was
microphone.
not started years ago, but I won't get into that. Let's just say that the idea is, I've been involved in historic preservation and restoration for 35 years. I have personally been involved in the restoration of some of the oldest buildings in the Delaware Valley. It is my professional experience that the first thing you do is not get in the way of preservation. And by getting in the way of preservation, the first thing to do is a historic impact study on every little thing. So I think it's a bad idea to do a historic impact study on this property for a subdivision. It makes no sense. A waiver makes absolute sense to me. An impact study would be if this was a farm complex to be cut into smaller bits, and it was a historically significant complex, not just a complex, then perhaps it would make sense to force someone to spend lots of money to do a study by a licensed professional. I don't know what that means because there is not a licensed professional. You either have an architect or a historian. There's not a license for this. So, $2,000 or $3,000 for a study that's going to tell us nothing other than someone is being paid to write a narrative about a property that will sit on a shelf and do nothing. If you want to preserve historic structures, get out of the way. Historic commissions are an impediment to restoration. If your idea is to have an idyllic setting, that nothing changes from some 19th century picture or 18th century picture, then move to Mother Russia. It's not here. Or buy everything. I encourage preservation. I wholeheartedly encourage it. It's a private endeavor. Because now I will use it as an example, not to call somebody out, but the middle of Bertrandville and the lights on the buildings. That is not a village center of the 19th century or early 20th century or 18th century. It is now lit with light pollution. We have no way to control that. Do I want you to tell me that I can't turn my lights on? Hell no. Do I want you to encourage me? Yes, but I don't want to pay money for you or anyone else to tell me that. I don't want you, George, telling me what color to paint my house, and I don't want to tell Bernie what color to paint his house. And the township has no business in that. You want to preserve a house, you want to preserve a farm, you want to preserve an outbuilding, encourage it. Don't legislate it, and get out of the goddamn business of historic commissions, historic architectural review boards. Well, HARB is the next step. That is the next step from this. And that is a taking, and I will not go down easily on that. That is horrible. You want it, the best thing you can do? Kill this ordinance. Rewrite it and make it almost impossible to get in the way because you're making it extraordinary. I'm done. Grant the waiver. You're going to do a whole lot of good. Thank you.
Sarah.
I was wondering if we were going to have to call the EMTs.
Call it what?
Worried about your blood pressure.
My blood pressure's fine, don't worry about it.
I was curious about whether the HC or the PC or the township engineer had really visited the site. Because we're talking about a farmstead. Do we know that there is nothing out there on the grounds? When we were thought we were looking at a house and barn and outbuildings at Bryn Coed. We knew there was a spring house, and we discovered a graveyard. So that would be my question is, when we're just looking at two driveways going down on the two side lots and the old house in the middle, do we really know that the house and the outbuildings right there by the road are the extent of the history on the property? So that was my question for those of you.
I don't know.
Well, then, maybe you don't want to grant the waiver if
Oh,
you
I
don't know the
definitely want to
answer.
grant the waiver, but somebody should and could just talk to the owner and maybe walk the property to see if there is anything on there. I mean, 100% with Carl on this.
It's really easy to find things, it's not difficult. You fly overhead with a drone, you can find all the depressions. I found lots of buildings that way.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, next is the authorization of our 2020 budget.
I can speak to that?
Oh, okay.
Oh, if you wanna-
Well, you didn't make the motion yet.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Daydreaming here. I make the motion to authorize the advertisement of the 2020 draft budget as presented.
Second.
Okay.
Okay,
Yep.
if you want to speak
Sure.
to it, that's fine.
I have a few copies here of the draft budget. It has been just slightly refined from the budget presentation earlier this month. Just to go over the numbers, we are looking at here. The general fund, we took a look at a few things within the budgets, just to look at the performances, all the good information from this year. We can use that to evaluate our position. So we're looking at proposed revenues of $4,356,950 with expenditures of $4,266,694. Looking at a net income of $90,256 at this point. Liquid fuels is unchanged from the budget presentation at $248,652. Same thing with open space, $1,530,000. Sewer, $55,000. The capital project fund, we did make one revision, received a comment, it was a good comment, about the capital fund and the separation between the road reserve and the project reserve. So we have renamed that project reserve because that's really specific to other capital projects. So that total is $115,000 for the capital project fund. And then the capital road fund at $1,570,000 of revenue, expenditures looking at $1,500,000 in expenditures for projects, and with interest and net income of $70,000. So we'll have this posted. Certainly we can refine even further. Of course, to have comments back, it'll be for public inspection for at least 20 days by township code.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have the authorization for a donation.
I make a motion to authorize the Green Valleys Watershed Association request for $1,500 contribution for 2019.
Second.
Any comments,
Is
questions?
that a general fund distribution to
Yes.
their general fund, or is it a specific project?
No.
Yeah, there is
Wait.
actually a
There is?
specific, well, they say they're requesting it for to match funding toward buffer work at Bird Coed Park.
Okay. So that's it.
I don't know what exactly.
I think they're getting a tree vitalized grant.
They're doing what?
Getting a tree vitalized grant to pay for the vegetation, and you have to have matching funds for those.
Brian, yes.
First, if you could go and tell me what Sarah said, because we couldn't hear behind her.
Something about vegetation.
We couldn't hear her up here either.
Okay. The question I had is, does Green Valleys also do a solicitation to the residents of West Vincent for funds every year also?
I don't know the answer to that.
Anyone?
I don't think there is I don't think there's any mailing to everyone in West Vincent about that. Or to everyone within the watersheds that they serve. Of course, they ask their membership for donations, and that's how they get they get a lot of their money. I don't know how it breaks down. And they certainly get a lot of grants, and they are serving the township incredibly with all the stream studies they're doing, making sure that there are no contaminants getting in the water, or tracing back to find problems, what's causing them. I give them a lot of money, and I recommend that the township do the same.
Well, of course, I have a problem with township government choosing charities for its residents, but
But this is helping
it
us.
doesn't matter.
This is.
Government cannot be charitable. It's not their money to be charitable. Charitable is a voluntary act of giving. Government can't do that.
They asked that.
They asked us, yeah, okay.
My only
Yes,
comment
Brian.
is basically kind of agreeing with Mike, and that it's interesting that an organization goes to the government functions to get money from the residents of the area if they're not appealing directly to the residents of the area for those funds.
Well, it's a lot easier. Okay, any other comments? Sarah?
I'm going to repeat my comment for
Okay.
Brian. I didn't even know he was here when he didn't have comments on the bill list.
He came in afterwards, that's all.
Oh, okay. So, the Tree Vitalize grant, which is, I think is how Vic is getting the vegetation, get trees and shrubs through a Tree Vitalize program, which is a state program that's administered by Chester County Conservation, whatever it's called. So, it needs to have matching funds or effort or something. And so she's asking for we're going to get some contribution from an outside agency, and she's asking that the township put some money in to help make that happen. So Green Valleys, I believe, is just the vehicle for making the deal. This is not a donation to Green Valleys, it's a donation to the Bryn Coed Park revegetation.
Do we,
One way of looking at it.
do we know, is this gonna be everything? It says matching grant, $1,500 from us.
So it would be a total of 3,000.
3,000?
Right.
But-
But only 1,500 from us and 1,500 from
I know,
the
but is this enough, vegetation, I mean, is this it?
I don't know for certain.
Yeah. I mean, is this, half of it, 10%, 50, 100, I don't know.
Yes, John?
One interesting comment, you said, do they solicit money from the members of the township? The fire company does, and we make donations, and we also, the township gives them significant amounts of money.
Yes, that's correct. Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
No. Okay, next on the agenda is public comment. Yeah, Carl.
Now that the election's over and the vote was pretty clear,
Yes.
will you be putting Sarah up in the seat now that she's going to end up with in a couple weeks? Or are you going to make her and everybody else wait till the
I think we
beginning of
have
the new
to.
year?
I think we have to wait until
You
the
don't.
6th. We don't?
No, George can resign now, he's the seat warmer, and Sarah can take that seat literally right now. You can do that right now.
That seems a little odd, but
I'm saying that's the process, it's easy to do.
it can be done, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, there's nothing in the way of
Carl,
doing that.
I object to you calling George a seat warmer. He has come up with valuable ideas that.
It was not a personal affront to George, it's a statement of fact. He's keeping this seat, he's occupying the seat for a short period of time. Now that there has been an election and a person has been selected by the electorate, it's time for that person to take the seat that she's going to ultimately take.
Carl, she is bringing herself up to speed, and she doesn't need to sit up here in order to do that.
Okay, so this is political now.
Oh,
No,
come on,
no,
Carl.
no.
She can sit there in the seat.
This is
There's
not
no reason to
political.
keep her out.
We'll end up with this with every election. Somebody gets elected, instead of the reorg in January, somebody will be wanting to move into the position. It hasn't been done. I don't know why we started this.
Absolutely, I did it when I took over, when I was elected.
You what?
I took the seat early. Sue Peterson finished out early, she stepped down, and I took her seat early.
That was way before my time. Okay.
Yeah,
So it has happened in the past.
it's happened many times. It's not uncommon. And George is a temporary position.
Yes, I understand.
He wasn't elected, he was appointed to fill temporarily. Again, nothing against George.
No, I know.
It's just getting Sarah in there, getting her to the meetings. George doesn't need to be in any more of the executive sessions.
I think I
doesn't
need to be
involved
there,
in
Carl.
I'm sorry?
I think I need to be there.
You have no legacy going forward on the board. The
But no one-
decisions should be the
But
But
voters.
no one does after they lose election, and they stay on board.
But he was never elected.
So that's the criteria that you're making up now?
I'm not making it up, I'm pointing out that you were never
I'm pointing
elected.
it out, but it,
He wasn't appointed till the end of the year.
yeah,
I'm just bringing up that Sarah has been elected duly.
truly,
And
and
it
for a
makes
term
sense.
beginning when?
Okay.
No, for a term beginning when?
Obviously.
You don't know.
Right.
Well, it is, it's beginning of the year.
Yes, I know when it is, George.
Well,
I'm
you
the
said
only
you
one in the
didn't
room
know,
who
but
has
that's what it
held a full term. I know the rules.
Okay,
I
then
know the
why
rules
are
better
you
than
bringing
anybody
this
in the
up
room.
now?
Why change them?
I'm not trying to change the rules. I'm pointing out that her term should start.
You're asking, and I said,
I'm just pointing it out. It makes sense.
Well, thanks.
That's
well,
all.
I don't think it makes sense.
I don't either, but it's fine. I mean, I don't either way.
Will she be participating in all executive sessions and meetings between now and the end
Not
of the
until
year?
she's sworn in January.
Okay, then that's just obviously political.
No, it's not
Mike, did
political.
you, when you were?
No, I didn't
For
I don't
a
even
year,
think step foot in
You
the
weren't
township
invited to any
until.
meetings?
What's that?
You weren't invited to participate? Well, then you were the first person in more
No,
than 30 years.
John wasn't either.
No.
No, Bernie
I was-
wasn't either.
That's,
You're going back 20, 30 years, and
I'm
maybe it
going
was
back
that
only a
way.
few years. We
You
can,
can't go back a few years, I've been here 4.
Three,
John was here
and-
6.
yeah, and I'm saying that when you were elected, you were not
Nope.
given the opportunity to attend or participate.
Nope. The only time I participated was after I was sworn in for the reorg, which makes sense. Because you're gonna have a reorg, you have all the committee appointments to do, which Sarah will be involved in. Before
All
the
of that's
reorg.
done before the reorg, though.
That's
He
right,
just said
that's what
she's
I'm
gonna
saying,
be
she's gonna be
involved.
involved in that for the reorg, because we need her input for committee appointments and everything else. So that will be done when she's sworn in January.
You joined the board, you and John swapped everything out for the reorg, and you did it by yourself. You didn't include the other member of the board, as I remember.
Dave, no, Dave was involved.
No, David,
He will say that he wasn't. So I'm trying to avoid all of that.
And
That's
reorg?
why I was trying to,
I don't know, I'd have to.
if she were to
I
join the
can't
board
remember.
now, it would be a seamless transition. That's all I'm after. I'm not looking to make this political, I'm just thinking it makes sense to me from an organizational point of view.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Hear none, I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. Damn, you're good.
What, did you say 35?
Yes, he did.
He held out for a second.
All right, thank you, John.
George, she said 45.
No.
Mike was 45.
I think we better still make comment.
But I remember during that day, our meeting was around the surprise that you said you had made a number of the appointment suggestions and did not discuss it with John during the month of December, but did not make it. So,
Oh, but we must have had a meeting before the reorg.
you were sworn in, like,
Got it.
No, I mean, you and I can talk about things.
Right.
And you and Bernie can talk about things, because you're not elected
right.
yet.
Yeah, so
Right,
that's
and I did that, yes, John and I did
But
that.
John, but David Brown showed that he, yeah.
He probably was until January.
Right,
Yeah,
I'm not
before they
expecting my
reorg.
kid sworn in on the first Monday in January.
Right.
Can I see the 52 plan that's for neighbors? I never did.
And down.
Yeah, that's not a lot of checks.
It's actually not that many.
So is this the Blouse's property and?
Yeah, this is the south side of
And this is Randy's house right now. And so,
Very clear.
so that's what we're when has that discussion on the, take a walk and see what's I gave him all.
Did you give him the area?
No, I didn't give him the area.
Sarah, that's the area.
I don't remember doing that, I didn't do that.
Oh, like what you have.
The dress was very good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wonder whatever. Okay. I mean, I don't know if, you know, that. And, I don't know if they, keep that conversation on the column. I mean, they do have artifacts around town. I don't know if they keep them.
No, I didn't.
That's the closest thing to historical. Bernie, yeah, it's fine.
This has been way longer than you needed to. You should just do
Really? Oh, that's cool. This must be cleanup time. I spent all day pulling junk out of my attic. Oh, my God. It's stuff like.
It's in there.
When you go from big house.
Big one?
This is small size.
Yeah, over that too, because I didn't see it. No.
5 years later. It's Todd. It's not here. Yeah, sadly, well, the house This was the second. I know, and even so you have their as well as your own. 2 generations.
As long as they,
Yeah, they do that.
I don't want any part of it. All right, I think that's it. Is this yours?
Yeah.
Big cost.
Bother or not, it's like,
Yeah. I'll see if I can put it right.
Maria, John, let's do that.